Good morning, everyone. Welcome to CSIS. I'm Dr. Kathleen Hicks. I direct the International Security Program here. And it's with great pleasure that I'm introducing this morning's event on the future of naval aviation. Before we begin today, I'm just going to give our usual safety reminder on our precautions. We feel very safe and secure in our building, but should a fire alarm or something of that sort go off, there's doors behind you in the audience, and of course to my left and right there are exits for the back of the building. So you just make sure that you're paying attention to a CSIS official who will stand up in that case to lead you through the room. The Maritime Security Dialogue is a product of CSIS and the U.S. Naval Institute coming together to highlight the particular challenges facing the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard, from national-level maritime policy to naval concept development and program design. We're very fortunate to have the series sponsored by Lockheed Martin and Huntington Ingalls Industries. And today, as I said, we'll be focusing on the future of naval aviation. And our discussion today is with Vice Admiral Mike Shoemaker, who's Commander of Naval Air Forces and Commander of Naval Air Forces U.S. Pacific Fleet in the past. And the event will be moderated today by Vice Admiral Pete Daly, who is the CEO of the U.S. Naval Institute. My job is to get off the stage so they can get on the stage to begin the discussion. So please join me in a round of applause for our speakers.
And Pete, thanks for the invitation to come back and do this to CSIS and Naval Institute, Lockheed, and Huntington Ingalls for sponsoring. And what a great crowd, good turnout. Last time we did this about a year ago, General Davis, Doug Davis, my counterpart in the Marine Corps side, and I were up here with Admiral Preer. And so I very much look forward to coming back and have an opportunity to talk about a couple of things today. I've been the Air Boss for about a year and a half now. And it's been an honor and privilege to serve in that capacity. Most importantly, as we all know, and if any of you that are wearing uniforms here today, clearly the people we get to work with, the folks that are really doing the heavy lifting day in and day out. If you look at CNOs, or at least our Navy design, we talk about core attributes. The integrity piece, the initiative piece of our quality and talented folks, I think they truly embody all of that. And then obviously rolling the toughness as well. So they continue to be, I think, our asymmetric advantage, our people. And we can talk a little more about that, but we'll talk really future of naval aviation. So what I'd like to do today, I'll talk for maybe about 20 minutes, if that, hopefully get through quickly. I'll talk about the really where we are today across the force, across the fleet from a demand perspective. Then focus on the future platforms as we move forward. I covered a couple of those, last time here with General Davis. Really focus on three: the F-35, the MV-22 Osprey, which we're working a couple of different things right now on those two platforms, and then MQ-25, our unmanned carrier-launched air vehicle. And then what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about the challenges, and if we get to that, and that's really some readiness challenges that we're working across the force, my concerns, and then really get to questions so we can get what's on your mind. If you look across the force today in naval aviation, we remain in very high demand, not just naval aviation, but Navy in general. And I think it's because of the value, the relevance, and clearly what we bring to our combatant and fleet commanders around the world. We are successfully delivering combat effects right now in the Middle East. We've been doing that for the last 15 years, and we do it very well. Just a few months ago, we had 4 carrier strike groups all at sea operating. Harry S. Truman and Air Wing 7 were turning over with Eisenhower and Air Wing 3 in the Eastern Med. At the same time in the Western Pacific, John C. Stennis, Air Wing 9, and Ronald Reagan and Air Wing 5 were operating just outside the first island chain. That's the first time in a long time we've had 2 carriers operating together and 1 dedicated deployment to the Western Pacific, not going through the Pacific onto the Middle East. So I think that was significant. So 4 carrier strike groups operating, and then we had 3 more in workups at that same time. Today we've got Truman is home, Stennis is home. Eisenhower stands to watch in the North Arabian Gulf, conducting operations in support of Inherent Resolve, and doing very well. Reagan is getting ready to get underway for her fall patrol, and then Vincent and Bush are the next to go. And they'll be out the door here in a couple of months, and then followed by Nimitz not too far after that. George Washington is underway right now off the eastern coast, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a second, doing our 3rd developmental test integration with F-35, and that's going very well. In addition to those carrier strike groups, if you look at the expeditionary forces, our squadrons and detachments around the world, 26 of those are underway or deployed as well. And that's P3, P8, and EP3, our helicopter detachments. VAQ, a single squadron forward deployed into the 7th Fleet. So it's not just carrier strike groups, and I think that they provide that visible forward deployed presence and deterrent value that reassure our partners and give, most importantly, I think, give our leaders options to respond quickly if needed. Look to the future of naval aviation. I think it's very bright. There's some challenges near term. I'll get to those at the end, but I think in the environment we're in, our N98, our resource sponsor, Mike Manazar, now Bullitt Miller, have done a great job in transitioning each of our platforms. So in every community except for 2, HM, our airborne mine countermeasures, and in our TACAMO, our E6Bs that fly and provide our nuclear command and control and communications mission set. Those are the only 2 we're looking to sustain here in the near term. Everyone else is in the middle of transition, so I think that's a good news story. As I talked about last time, E-18Gs, the Growlers, are complete in their transition. And as the Marine Corps phases out of their last Prowlers, they'll be the only airborne electronic attack that we're going to have in the DoD inventory. We've got some of those capabilities resident in F-35, the electronic attack, but I think when you look at what, as these airplanes have been operating in joint exercises down at Nellis Air Force Base and up in Alaska, our joint partners flying F-22, F-35 clearly value the contributions of that Growler, what it brings to that fight, so they remain in high demand. And then we bring on Next Generation Jammer, makes it even more formidable as we work in the electromagnetic spectrum. I talked to helicopters. Romeo and Sierra are through their transition. We did it this year. The last HSC squadron transitioned. They're complete. And I've said before, they're a very potent combination as you fly them in the carrier air wing for the anti-submarine warfare, anti-surface warfare mission in and around the carrier in that close-in defense zone, inner defense zone. You partner those Romeos with P-8s. They do a very good job in the undersea warfare environment. In fact, as we go by Hawaii in each of our deployments, those platforms operate together against our own forces as we practice. And those submarine commanders simulating operating forces say it's very, very difficult to obviously penetrate, get in to the high-value units. So they're doing very well in that environment. Our P3 to P8 transition about halfway done. The East Coast is complete. The fall starts their transition when VP4 comes to Whidbey Island from Hawaii later this year. They're in their 2nd year of deployments. P8 is in the Western Pacific, where we've focused delivering that new platform. They're operating in Europe, and they had their first 2-plane detachment in Bahrain here recently. So I think they're doing a very good job as we prioritize to those AORs that need ASW and maritime domain awareness. We're finding them to obviously doing a very, very good job following the P3. Following the P3. For E2Ds, we've got 3 squadrons transition there. Not as fast as I would like, but we're moving in the right direction there. We had 1 squadron completed deployment on Theodore Roosevelt, and then we're going to move that squadron to Japan early next year. So that's, again, that will make Air Wing 5 in Japan our most capable, continuing to push our most capable platforms and to the Western Pacific. Much has been talked about with E2s and their new sensor suite, the radar that brings really the unique capabilities for the Navy Integrated Fire Control Counter-Air, where that platform will be the quarterback, essentially, for the Air Wing and the Joint Forces. But again, we're also seeing some very significant overland improvements as that airplane flies in conjunction with its Air Wing in Fallon. Legacy F-18s, we've got 5 left in the Navy. General Davis has quite a few more on the Marine Corps side. Very capable, higher lot aircraft, but like the Marine Corps, we have some readiness challenges there as we try and stretch them beyond their 6,000-hour life, with the majority of that force well beyond 6,000 already. We've talked strike fighter inventory management over the years. We'll continue to do that for a few more years as we sustain those platforms in the Navy side and do the same thing for General Davis. Our Rhino fleet, F-18Es and Fs, probably the workhorse of the force. I'd call them a 4.5 generation aircraft, a very perfect complement and partner for F-35 when we get that platform in the fleet. It'll be important that we modernize the Rhino so we keep them up to speed and keep it relevant. As we look out 10 to 15 years, they will still make up 3/4 of the strike fighters in our air wing. So it's important that we do that. I've been advocating for more. I look ahead to when that platform will reach its service life of 6,000 hours. which is not too distant future. So we've got a plan for that service life extension, take the lessons learned from legacy and make sure we do that right. So we keep them relevant and as part of that airway moving forward. I watch utilization across the force of those assets when they're flying forward, deployed, and track that closely. But we're putting some hours on that part of the fleet, and so we've got to ensure that we get that service life extension right. We shift into unmanned. We've been flying Fire Scout for a while now. They've just finished their initial deployments, partnering with Romeo, and we just sent Coronado out the door in San Diego with Sierra helicopters, partnering with Fire Scout. Lots of rotational debts planned. Learning curve is very steep as we integrate manned and unmanned and bring that maritime ISR capability to our LCS fleet and then for use elsewhere. Triton, unmanned wingman for our P-8. We've got 3 air vehicles testing at PAX right now. That's progressing well, and we expect our first orbit in the Western Pacific in 2018. MQ-25 Stingray. This was our carrier-based UAV. It's evolved over time from U-class a while back. Called it C-bars for a little bit, and now we're into the, I think we finally got to MQ-25 Alpha. We just finished our final concept refinement. Following that, RFPs, requests for proposals, went out to industry. Those are back. We're kind of looking at where the trade space is. There's a tanker study, tanker trade study that DoD commissioned, and it's really to get at the design of the 2 mission sets we think that airplane will do. The tanker piece, mission tanking, I think is its priority focus there, and then certainly intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, an ISR gap that we need filled on the carriers there. As I talk to those industry partners, I realize there's those 2 platforms, those 2 designs to do one or those other mission sets alone are different. You drive a high endurance, probably not a lot of fuel on board, but a very efficient, large wingspan, efficient platform for the ISR. If you're going to be a tanker at range, you've got to obviously be able to carry a fair amount of fuel internal to the platform. So that drives a different design for those 2. So the industry is working on, and we have done the same analysis, where that sweet spot is to do both of those missions, to be able to give mission at range, number of hoses you require, etc., how big that platform will be on the ship, which is a key attribute, spot factor on the carrier, and then how many people it'll take to run that detachment. So we've got a way to go there. But as CNO has said, and all of our resource sponsors, we need to get that to the fleet as quick as we can so we can start learning about that manned-unmanned teaming and integrate that into the air wing. I'm encouraged by NavAir's and our PEO's efforts to accelerate that process, but we need that ISR to the fleet, ISR tanking asset to the fleet soon. F-35, I mentioned GW at sea with the DT-3, which is our 3rd and final developmental test going on right now. Our squadron, our FRS for F-35, VFA 101, was just out there on the ship. They qualified, I think, 6 pilots. Actually, may have been a few more than that. Their test pilots are going now. We've got about 100 traps that they flew out on GW, and of those, 80% were 3-wire. So I say that because there's some unique things that come with F-35 I'll talk about in a second when we talk magic carpet and delivering some capabilities to Rhino as well. We've got about 30 aircraft total now for F-35, a couple dozen down in Eglin at VFA 101. We'll move to Lemoore in early 17, stand up that FRS, VFA 125, and then start the first squadron transition late fall. So it's ready for IOC late 18 is what we're planning for. Right now we're working through some challenges with operational tests, but we'll be ready in Lemoore. Everything is on track from a training MILCON perspective to be ready to accept and declare IOC for F-35. The big concern, I think, is the 3F software. That has to happen. That's part of our IOC calculation. The JPO is working that hard, and I'm confident that we're going to get there. They've been up a couple times, F-35s, to integrate in Fallon, and that's been a very unique opportunity to start that 4th and 5th gen integration and understand what that really brings from a capability perspective. And flying with Rhino and Growler, we understand the low observable penetration capability F-35 brings, but when you look at the ability to fuse data, put it all together, both active and passive sensors, share that with the other platforms in the air wing and the joint force, give us long-range combat ID. That's where I think the true value we'll see in F-35. We did learn, though, as you start operating up in Fallon, you quickly get past and beyond the boundaries of that range up there, both airspace and electromagnetic spectrum. So we've got to push a lot of that training, the capabilities, or the ability to practice the high-end mission sets into the virtual and constructive world. And we've done just that up in Fallon with where we have just now completed an air defense strike group facility. We've run about 4 different integrated air defense exercises there with our surface ship counterparts, Super Hornets, and E-2Ds. So it brings a unique capability. We'll continue to expand that in Fallon into all of our fleet concentration areas. I mentioned the number of 3-wires they got when they went out. This platform comes with the Delta Flight Path capability, similar control logic that we'll put into our Super Hornets with Magic Carpet. Talked about a lot in the paper recently, but as they were working up for this bounce period for the time on board GW, they practiced an outlying field down in Pensacola called Choctaw. And they were landing in the same spot on the runway every time, tearing up where the hook touches down, same spots. We quickly realized we've got to either fix the runway now or adjust, put some variance into the system. So that's how precise this new system is. We bring it to Super Hornets, Magic Carpet, the same kind of flight control logic. I think that's going to give us unique ability to look at the way we work up and expend the number of sorties in terms of bouncing. I think it'll change the way we operate around the ship, given the majority of the force will be Rhino or Growler. And in terms of number of tankers you have to have up both daytime and nighttime, and I think that'll give us a lot of flexibility in the air wing in terms of the way we use those strike fighters. And I think that'll shape a little bit the discussion on MQ-25 as well, with maybe a reduction in the overhead requirements, but still needing the ability to tank at range. The last platform in transition is from our C-2 Greyhound to the Osprey, CMV-22 Bravo. We just finished up a 2 weeks fleet battle experiment out on Carl Vinson, running dead operations just like we would on deployment. Ran them out of North On. Very successful integration into those cyclic operations. We flew our C-2 COD pilots in the jump seat, each of those events going out. They watched Osprey operate. They're very excited about the opportunities this platform will bring to the air wing. And then as we got on board, the OPSO, the air boss, and the handler, all excited about the way they can use that integrated into our cyclic ops and make that the future carrier on board delivery. So I think that's a good news story and how that worked up, or how they worked up. I talked platforms there. Last thing I'll mention in terms of the future pieces of new carriers. Ford is, will be working through, hopefully at sea for builders trials and sea trials here in late fall, October, November, and then we'll deliver. Working through the testing pieces right now, propulsion plant, combat systems, integrated flight deck. A few concerns again with new technology on board, but I think in first of class, not unusual for first of class, and I don't think any are insurmountable. She'll get to see operate during those builder trials, sea trials, do a shakedown period after that, a couple different independent steaming exercises, and then get into a post-shakedown availability. Then begin her real operational test and integration. Eventually, we'll deploy in 2021 if we do the full ship shock trials, which are a requirement. I think we could use her sooner when I talk about the number of carriers we've got right now, but I got a chance to tour her a few months ago, and I can tell you that the ship is coming to life. And I look around the flight deck, the design, the layout, the way we intend to launch, recover, spot, arm, rearm, refuel, much more efficient than in this class. So I'm excited about what that brings to the fleet. You look at the self-defense capabilities, the combat systems that will be on that platform, the survivability that we're building in, power generation capacity, all good things. Quality of life for sailors, as you look at the way we're going to take care of them, very, very good news story there. And like all of our carriers, that will come, again, with a 50-year life. The value of nuclear power, I think, it gives us the opportunity to have lots of space available on board for ordnance, storage, fuel, et cetera, and she'll bring the endurance and flexibility that all of our carriers bring. And then, like we have done, and you've seen it in the recent, in our history here, it will continue to evolve with that air wing over time. We've got 10 right now. Ford is our 11th. I need her in the fleet as soon as we can get her there. I've got one in RCOH, the midlife refueling overhaul, one in a docking availability. I've got one up in Japan all the time now, so that's really 7 to meet a 2.0 demand for both Pacific and either UCOM or CENTCOM requirements. So, with about a 4 to 1, we're short. So I need Ford in the fleet soonest. Last thing for the future stuff, I talked platforms, and that's key that we continue those transitions. But there's sustainment that has to happen with those. And then there's the weapons, the sensors, and probably the most important, the networks that have to be all part of that future air wing as we link it together. Weapons in development bring us the ability, both air-to-air and air-to-surface, to extend the reach of the air wing. well beyond our air wings of the past, and I'm confident that what we're delivering, what we're working on in N98 will give us that. Key is the long-range ID, being able to ID at range both surface and air contacts, and that's where the sensors and our integration with manned, unmanned, joint, space, all domains, and really the networks that will bring all that information together and share it. So they'll be key, those networks, to building that battle space awareness, to assuring that we can command and control those forces forward, and then the most important piece is coordinating the integration fire. So all of that done through a very robust and common network technology. Okay, I've probably gone a little bit too long here. Let me, real quick, I'll mention the two challenges, and we can get to them in questions if you'd like. It's really the ability to generate current readiness and recover readiness at the same time. I mentioned the demand signal, probably supply or the supply of our forces is not sufficient to meet the demand right now. So I think in terms of recovery readiness and generating readiness, that's our #1 priority inside the Naval Aviation enterprise. And then the biggest challenge is the budget pressures, the fiscal uncertainty in the world we're in right now, and being able to prioritize that, both the future capabilities with the wholeness of that current force. And it shows in both sustaining our aircraft and also our carriers, which are coming out of maintenance a little bit longer as we continue to operate them forward in the recent past year. Sino mentioned when he was talking about his testimony, he says the challenges are increasing and the funding is decreasing. Admiral Davidson went back when I talked current readiness. He went out to the Hill to testify with 4 of our major commanders about our readiness challenges across the force. Representative Forbes had a statement at the beginning of that testimony. And he said, we're not currently providing our Navy with the resources it needs to do what we ask, at least not without burning out our ships, planes, and sailors and undermining our long-term readiness. I couldn't have said it better than that. I'll leave that as sort of the encapsulation of our current readiness challenges. As I look forward, I think the future of naval aviation is bright, but we have to work through the fiscal uncertainties and those near-term readiness challenges. As I look across the force, I said, although we're accepting risk in some of those parts of our fleet response plan, the early maintenance phase and then probably coming home from deployment in the sustainment phase, those forces that are working up and on deployment have what they need to do the job required as they go forward. And I couldn't be more proud of the way those sailors are operating at sea and ashore around the world today. So I'll stop there and be ready for any of your questions. Thanks. Okay.
Admiral?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Admiral, for that that speed definition of where you stand. It was very comprehensive. You know, one of the things that comes up all the time is carriers in a contested environment. Yeah. And there's been a lot of discussion, but there's, I think, agreement on a few points. One is that the enemy, the near-peer competitors, and their ability to muster anti-access area defense denial is increasing. Right. And especially in certain areas of the world, they bring a bigger capability. There also seems to be agreement that in the near past, we've been operating in a fairly permissive environment. It allowed us to do things more easily. We could take up some of the slack just because of what we were being asked to do. But now there seems to be agreement that it's changed. Can you talk about that, and in addition, talk about the fact that maybe not just the carrier is vulnerable, but the aircraft and the reach and the composition of the air wing for the tasks at hand?
So this is very much in the news and the discussions as you go back and forth about the vulnerability of our carriers. I'm confident with what, as I described, what our resource sponsor has been doing with our platforms and the weapons that we'll bring with those platforms, as well as sensors and networks. Marry that up with our carriers and the strike group as a whole when it goes forward. I'm confident we have, in an unclassed environment to talk about, the ability to create to maneuver in a contested environment, create battle space to do what we need to do, maneuver again, and operate, not with impunity, but certainly with awareness of the risk that's out there. I often see the lines of the DF-21 drawn on a map. We give it a piece of K of 1-0, which means it's going to work all the way throughout that. That's a very long kill chain, as many have talked about. We've got lots of things we do to disrupt that from all angles, and the final piece being what we do to defend the carrier, make it hard to target. And I think and Admiral Swift talks about this a lot in his environment, his AOR out there. If you're not maneuverable, you're not relevant. And so as I look around the force and how we operate and how our strike group commanders in 7th Fleet, Monty Montgomery and then Sergeant Alexander after him, how they practice and operate in that environment, I'm confident we'll be able to do as I described, create those sanctuaries where we need to operate. If I had a son or daughter, you know, in the Navy right now, and someone said, "Is it safe to be out in that environment out there?" I said, "Well, I'd say if the place where they're, I'd have no problem with them being on the carrier. I'd be very confident that they're in a good spot because of our ability to maneuver, the things we're practicing, the capabilities we're delivering in that integrated air wing, ship, and strike group moving forward."
How about the air wing itself? I mean, you talked about the good place that you're in with those 2 exceptions where you're introducing that new type model series, and is there any rethinking about the capabilities inherent in those aircraft and the air wing that makes up? Any rethinking there, or do you think we've got it right in terms of capability and reach of the air wing?
I think we have what I talked about today. We have that will be the air wing as we introduce F-35 with what I laid out, F-35 and MQ-25. That will be the air wing of 2025, and I see it composition-wise fairly similar to what we have today. I mentioned Magic Carpet. I think that will give us some opportunities to maybe bring on a few additional growlers, give up a few of the just the numbers. Right now we configure probably between 6 and 8 tankers on the ship. I don't think we'll need to do that many of our Super Hornets. So I think it'll give us some flexibility in strike fighter numbers, increase the growler numbers, which I know we're going to need to do, and probably E-2D as well. Then there's the manned-unmanned teaming that we've got to get right. And that's why I said for MQ-25, we need to get that to the fleet as soon as we can, so that however that looks, start that manned-unmanned teaming, learning to operate unmanned in that environment, look for other ways to take advantage of that with other technologies that are out there. But I think from just the pure platforms, you know, as I look to 2025 and a little bit beyond that, the composition is good. The weapons that we're delivering, I think, give us that expanded reach when you fly out to the ranges and maybe even do some refueling, but out to the range of our platforms, and then add on a missile that gives us the ability to touch something well beyond where we did in the past. And again, the key piece, though, is that long-range combat ID, and making sure we get that right.
Thanks. So you mentioned the challenge. You know, one of your challenges is current readiness, and you didn't dispute Congressman Forbes' statement, but you didn't endorse it either. You just said, I think he's probably right. But
I think he's got it right.
Well, if he is right, you know, you hear a lot of stories that kind of remind, at least me, of the 2000 time frame. You know, we had the whole thing that got the Naval Aviation enterprise going was this you know, we had maintainers at Lemoore that were working till, you know, 2300, swapping parts, swapping engines, leaving the Navy, and we were in a dive. And now today, you hear a lot of stories about, you know, 70%, like the one quote from the Marines, 70% of the aircraft that they had on the ramp were not flyable, not ready aircraft. You seem to get the sense that at the operational level of maintenance and at the depot level of maintenance, that the maintainers are overwhelmed by the situation. That so what gives here? Do you think that we need a new approach to that might involve bringing in different help, maybe the original aircraft manufacturers, teams, or also from the aspect of SLEP and SLAP? Do we need to revisit those strategies? Do we have it right?
Well, we learned a lot in the strike fighter inventory management journey as we manage our legacy F-18s. In the main lines of effort, you mentioned them, depot production, the deep maintenance that's done to get those airplanes beyond their service life. That happens on regular intervals with all of our type model series. Then there's, you know, the opportunity to tap into OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, to help us in terms of flight line repairs, in-service repairs, those things that can't be done by our O-level squadron maintainers. That's a great news story in the F-18 world because we've got dedicated teams in each of our main concentration areas, Beaufort, Miramar for the Marines, Oceana, and Lemoore for our Navy Hornets. That's another line of effort there, and obviously the supply piece is always in the news. General Davis talks about it. We're very much engaged with NAVSUP, WSS, the leadership up there, the things that John Ewan and Paul Verastro just left. Duke Hines just came in as our, he does weapon system support, but he and his team up there are very much engaged in leaning forward with obligation authority, working with OEMs to find alternative sources for parts that we need. So I think, you know, I mentioned, General Davis and I, the things we learned from the legacy Hornets, all those lines of effort, we're applying across every one of our type model series right now. And we actually brief CNO and Commandant tomorrow on a kind of our third brief on an update on our readiness recovery plan. The needles are moving. They're moving slowly, not as fast as Dog or I would like. But I think we have the problem bounded, and I think we've got the support we need in most cases from here in the city and then from our industry partners.
I don't know how much you can share with us, but if you could, you said you think you've got it about right, bounded. If you could change something, or would it be just resources, hours, people, more aircraft to fill the gap between Hornets and F-35? What's the, if you could change a couple things, what would those be?
So I think the first would be, and we've talked at length about this, both Nasty and General Davis, it's the readiness enabler accounts. It's resourcing. We obviously pay attention to the flight hour accounts because that directly translates into readiness. But what we've seen over the last, since we've kind of come through the heavy use periods and then recovering from sequestration, we've seen that we're not able to fully execute those accounts because we don't have sufficient up airplanes on our flight lines to fly. A little more acute for the Marines than us. Our risk is happening mostly in maintenance phase and then coming back from deployment. But what's required, there's a, if we continue to not fly that flight hour account, it ends up being just a vicious circle. There are other accounts, the ones that fund depot maintenance, the ones that pay for parts, the ones that fund our contract logistics support, that pay for parts and the ability to get to buy ahead. Those accounts, and probably one of the key ones, it's not a big investment, but it's an air system support. It gets at the emergent readiness issues on our flight lines with people and processes that allow us to kind of nip things in the bud quickly. Those accounts have not been resourced close to the requirement, and we dug a huge divot in every one of them when we came through sequestration. 11, 12, and 13 all were years where we disinvested, and so we're still trying to dig out of that readiness divot that we dug. We're not there yet, but those enabler accounts are absolutely critical. You mentioned buying more. The SLEP piece for Super Hornets is as we approach, our first 6,000-hour Super Hornet probably next year.
Right.
We've got to make sure we get that right, and we're partnering and working with industry to look for additional capacity beyond our organic depots. And we're going to have to do that. But I think if we look at where we are from an out of reporting our legacy Hornets, we can't afford to have Rhinos be at 50% of the fleet out of reporting, so we try and manage that. We've got to keep that number down at about a fifth, maybe, is our target. And so that's going to require both a combination of organic and OEM support to do that. That's a big concern as we move forward.
I'm going to open it up to the audience. I just have to ask, I can't ask you about readiness without this one just alibi, which is you see reports, and since 2009, there's been an increase in incidents in the cockpit of decompression sickness and hypoxia. It seems to be a significant safety issue.
Yes.
Could you tell us where we're at?
Absolutely, and it's our number inside the Naval Aviation enterprise. General Davis, Paul Grossglags at NavAir, and me, our #1 safety item focus. And we are, so lots of things we're learning here. We've got the engineers engaged at NavAir, the smart guys that are working on ways to better understand both our onboard oxygen generating system, where we have degrades in that, where the cabin pressurization has issues. We've adjusted the warnings we get in the cockpit. We've adjusted the emergency procedures that we respond to for the various scenarios. We've been out to the fleet to talk about the how to test how the maintainers work and maintain those systems, test for those different failure modes. awareness to talk to the pilots. We have a remote oxygen breathing device that we practice in the training command before you ever get in an airplane in a T-45. You actually go in a simulator, practice degrading the oxygen piece so you get a sense of what hypoxia is like. There are some contaminants in the system that we're still struggling with a little bit, but the engineers are figuring out ways to filter and identify that. And so I think we see an increase in the reporting. I think part of that I'd tie to an increase in awareness. So guys are coming back, and we've said, look, there's nothing wrong with reporting this. We need to understand and make sure we understand all the failure modes. I think we're doing a good job of that. Paul and his team at NavAir are working as fast as they can, including OEMs, to get to solutions here. Either there's some scrubbers, if you will, in the system that actually clean the air we use in the O-bogs. We come up with a new design for that. That's coming to the fleet here very soon, and as quick as we can accelerate. So we're putting a full court press on this. It is our #1 safety issue. I think with the awareness across the fleet and the importance of just understanding your emergency procedures, when you comply with those, I think it's manageable. I mean, guys aren't comfortable with where we are. I'm not either, but I think before we get to the engineering solutions, I think we've done what we can from an awareness and emergency procedures in the fleet to be safe to operate our airplanes.
Got it. Thank you. I'd like to open it up. When we have microphones, if people would raise their hand. I ask that you ask a question and you identify yourself, and we'll start here. This gentleman right here.
Thank you. John Harper with National Defense Magazine. Admiral, you mentioned some of the design challenges regarding an unmanned aircraft that can perform both the tanker and ISR mission. To what extent do you want the MQ-25 or a next-generation aircraft to have stealth capabilities, and to what extent does that further exacerbate those design challenges?
Yeah. Well, if you remember back to U-class, that was part of our initial design. You know, the performance parameters that we were looking for was survivability. I think through the strategic portfolio review that happened fairly recently at DepSecDef's level, they identified a need for the tanking role, and I think mission tanking is probably the place where it's most appropriate. And I think in the latest round of things, we've not stressed the survivability piece. Now, if you look at the way you would conduct mission tanking, you've got to push something out ahead of everybody to get it on station so you can launch your other airplanes, get up there at range and tank. So if you send that out by itself, the MQ-25, and it doesn't have survivability, you've got to make sure you know where you're sending it so it's not going to get, shot down. I think if you look at where we've been with many of the industry partners, there are some shapes that they have designed already that help in that survivability piece. And if there's a way to capitalize on existing designs in what we come to in terms of I won't call it a compromise solution, but what MQ-25 ends up being, even though we've not said survivability is a key parameter this time around, I think there's ways to take advantage of some of the shapes already out there. I think if it was going to be the old U-class, we were going to use that to be our eyes and ears for the strike group into contested environment, you definitely want that survivability piece, the stealth portion of it. There was an article recently that talked about stealth tanker. Those two don't go together with MQ-25. So that's something we'll continue to work and probably evolve. That's why we need to get that to the fleet as soon as we can so that we can start practicing with it, use it, integrate it with the air wing, and then figure out where it best fits into that support going into the contested environment.
Okay. This gentleman right here.
Those are Scott Klumpner, Washington Institute for Near East Policy. When the Air Force pivoted to unmanned ISR platforms over the last 15 years, they had to solve new problems related to training, retention, force management.
Yeah.
What is the state of the Navy's pilot force, and what challenges do you see coming over the next 10 or 15 years for them?
Specific to unmanned integration or just across the force?
In general, and specifically, if you see any challenges related to the growth of unmanned ISR capabilities for the Navy.
Yeah. Let me start just with kind of where we see from a pilot perspective across the force, pilot info, maybe retention. A lot of discussions in the paper about Air Force challenges keeping pilots around. As we work very closely with our folks down in Millington and monitor the state of naval aviation from a manning perspective. I think we don't have a shortage right now. We've come off, we had a retention trend where we peaked at about 2009. We've slowly come off that a little bit, but we still have in our processes, we still have selectivity. It's clearly we have quality across the force as we move from junior officers to department heads to squadron COs. But we're seeing at the initial decision point, when minimum service requirement is up, we're seeing the take rate on the bonuses that will keep guys around, the aviation career continuation pay. That's trended down slightly. We're still in a place where we're in a good spot, but the trends are coming down a little bit. In the post-command commander retention, guys leaving command after squadron, or leaving after squadron command, that's kind of peaked up, and it has obviously my attention as well. But there are some things in place that those are starting to trend back to normal now. But two that I'm watching very closely. But across the force, I look this year and ahead to what we project for next year, we don't see a shortage in pilots. Now, there's same competing forces the Air Force has. Airlines hiring, some challenges, the readiness challenges I described. If you're in a squadron that's sitting for a long time in maintenance phase, you may not be getting the same flight hours as your peers are. That's frustrating for junior officers who really want to be good in their platform. But I think across the force, we're okay now, but I'm clearly paying attention to those key trends. As we move into unmanned, the way we've chosen in both Fire Scout and Triton is to use the kind of expand on the community that will own those. Like for Fire Scout, the Romeo and Sierra communities are doing that when they put the detachments forward. There's the combination there. We'll do fly both helicopters and also do the unmanned. For Triton, we'll do the same thing where it will become purely from the P8 community, P3 P8 community to operate that platform. We'll manage seashore rotations so we can do that going forward. Still working on the MQ-25 and how we will integrate that, whether we create a community or we try and do that internal to a community like the E2C2 community, given its ISR, maybe tanking piece. That's one we're still working through. But unlike the Air Force, I don't think we'll be where we're going to create an unmanned community and the potential challenges that would come with it. But we're still kind of working through that discussion in terms of MQ-25. Yeah.
Okay, this gentleman right here in the middle.
Good morning, Admiral. Lucas Tomlinson, Fox News. There's been an increase in crashes in naval aviation in the past few years.
Yeah.
Would you call that a crisis?
Actually, I don't know I'd call it a crisis. I look back if I go back 10 years and I watch the trends in naval aviation, the overall trends are coming down. It was 2014 was not a great year for us. We've had a rash of mishaps. I won't say a rash of mishaps. We went 2/3 of this year with one Class Alpha. And then we had 3 in the span of 8 days. And as hard as it is to explain how we went 2/3 of the year with one, the same thing is with the 3 in 8 days. There's no time. As I look back at those, and then the last couple of years trying to make a tie to readiness or proficiency, in every case that's not there. There's some other lower level mishaps, ground related mishaps where experience levels of folks may play into it, as they're working on airplanes or moving airplanes around. But I look at the trends and a target that Admiral Davidson and Fleet Forces has given each of the type commanders to get toward a target in 2020 from 14 to 15 to where we are today, where actually the trends for Navy aviation is coming down. So I wouldn't characterize it as a crisis. I get a question a lot, do you tie it to readiness or a lack of proficiency and currency? And in the review of those mishaps, I can't make that connection. There are other procedural things, crew resource management things, but not a direct tie to readiness impacts. I think because we're focused very much on, when I mentioned the challenges for maintenance phase and digging out of maybe a little bit deeper bathtub, those squadrons are very proactive in how they manage risk until they're back up to a good level.
Here in the front.
Hi, sir. Megan Eckstein with U.S. Naval Institute News. You talked about the issue of your pilots not having access to all the flight hours that are available due to lack of ready aircraft.
Yeah.
General Davis has talked in pretty specific detail about how that's affecting the different communities, and I was wondering if you could just characterize in a little more detail how those ready aircraft are affecting the different communities you have.
I just had a meeting 2 days ago with all my community commodores, and they update me both on the FRS production and then how the fleet squadrons are doing. And I asked them to go back last 6 months and give me a sense of where the in-maintenance phase, the ones most acutely affected, what were their pilots getting on average for flight time. And I look across the force, the two most impacted by the ready up airplane challenges are VFA, our strike fighters, and E2, C2. And in all cases, they were the lowest ones, but it was all of them averaging between 12 and 14 hours a month in maintenance phase. Now, it's a little below where we're supposed to be for maintenance phase, but it's above what we defined a few years ago as our tactical hard deck. Not ideal, but again, so if that's the average, there are some that are down in the probably single digits, and there's some that are flying above that, and squadron COs are managing that. But where General Davis talked at length about some of his squadrons for a long time sitting, and they don't do the tiered readiness like we do as part of our fleet response plan model. So I don't think we're in that state, I guess, of readiness from that perspective. So I watch that closely. I've been tracking it every month. I get those reports on the pilots, the number of hours they're flying. But right now, it's below what we target for maintenance phase, but it's above our tactical hard deck and the risks that go with that. But I think our squadron COs are doing a good job managing it.
Okay. Over here on the right side.
Thank you, sir. Brett Craig with the Reserve Officers Association. You mentioned P8 recapitalization being about 50% complete. Does Navy have intentions to recapitalize VP62 and VP69, or are they going to continue in the P3? And if they continue in the P3, I'd be interested in your concerns on the loss of that capability and expertise in the face of a rising China when those squadrons finally have to sundown.
Yeah, great question. And I work that very closely with Admiral Crane. Mike Crane is the Commander Naval Air Forces Reserve. And that's one of the conversations we've had with our resource sponsors back here in D.C. What do we do with 62 and 69? They've been huge. I mean, they've participated routinely in forward deployed detachments, augmenting our active forces. A great last-up active reserve there. It's not in the plan right now to transition them to P8. They will be used extensively, I think, as we finish the P3 to P8 transition on the active side to fill some gaps and some of the key platforms or capabilities that they bring and will bring to the AOR you just mentioned. But we're, again, in a perfect world, would we transition those guys to P8 if we had unlimited resources? Absolutely. That'd be the right thing to do so we can build that active reserve transition or integration for that community. I do it across many of our communities, but we're not in that position right now from a resource perspective. So we're watching that closely. We'll need them around, I think, for a little while to obviously still flying P3s. If that's what we leave them in, they'll get the best of breed of those platforms and fly, good airplanes. But right now, there's not a plan to transition them in the current environment.
Okay. This lady right here in the front.
Hi, Admiral. Megan Myers, Navy Times. So my question is, in terms of the Osprey, what are you doing to address some of the concerns in the fleet about its safety and also about its ability to carry as much cargo as the C2 does?
So I think its safety record, I'm not hearing that in the fleet. I mean, early on we introduced the Osprey. There were some growing pains. Right now, the Marine Corps is flying it, and I think is very happy with its safety record, its performance. Our guys saw the same thing as they were operating on Carl Vinson. If you look at the cargo inside, it's slightly smaller than what you could put in a C2. A few less passengers, but I think the way you do the reconfiguring of seats inside Osprey, it gives you some opportunity to do some passenger cargo mix and quickly reconfigure that we didn't have in the C2. I think when we put in the extended range package that will be part of the CMV-22, it will be out at C2 range comparable to that, or actually even beyond, out around 1,100 plus miles for legs. So I think and so we looked at this specifically during the fleet battle experiment in terms of capacity of people and cargo. And I think although it's slightly smaller, it brings the ability to land, to come out at night. We don't bring CODs out at night. We brought the Osprey out numerous times at night to do maybe a third supply run. And so that was value added. So although we give up a little bit, people and cargo, I think the flexibility Osprey brings will be good.
Could you just elaborate a little bit on, is there any surprises, and, goods, bads, and others with the, the recent testing on the flight deck, and specifically, could you speak to the impact of operating the aircraft on the flight deck and the ability to, generate sorties?
So I mentioned Air Boss, really liked it, the flexibility it brings. Probably the one guy that, had some comments is the handler. He's got to work bring an airplane in between cycles. And what we found was we quickly learned how to do this. If you weren't refueling the Osprey, you could get packs loads in and out done in about 20 minutes. You land it in the LA or you land it after the one wire in the LA. And so you can't leave it turning for long. But we found both with packs and cargoes, we quickly, as we learned how to operate it, determined we could do that in 20 to 30 minutes. 30 minutes, a little over 30 minutes with cargo, easily 20 minutes if it's just passengers on and off. And so that's in between cycles. The big flexibility, I think, is outside the fly days. When you bring an Osprey out to the ship, you can do it day-night, but you don't have to man up all the catapult and resting gear folks. So it takes about 6 folks to launch and recover Osprey. It would take about 40 or so to man up the ship to bring in the COD. So that's some unique, operating benefits, I think, that come with Osprey. The handler, though, I think as long as we package the cargo in the right way and take advantage of the opportunity to maybe roll forklifts on and off, and there's lots we learned in this experiment, but I think we'll be to the point we can do this quickly, make it fit inside cyclic ops, and really take full advantage of what Osprey would bring.
Thanks. Right here. Third row.
Hi, Austin Wright with Politico. Are you pushing for the Navy to continue buying Super Hornets after FY18? And if so, should that be taken as a rebuke in any way to the F-35?
First question, yes. I think as I look ahead to our ability to make sure that as we modernize or do the service life extension on Rhinos, and plan for a certain amount that we'll be out of reporting to get that maybe year-long process done to take them to the next flight hour milestone, and we're working through what that would be. Even if we can manage it at 20 or 25 or 30%, that will be, we're still going to be, we'll still accept risk in what we can to ensure squadrons have the airplanes they need throughout the FRP. And to do it all the way out till we're through this initial SLEP stuff well into the next probably in 2025. So that gives us, and we're utilizing Rhinos now. So I think that helps pay for some of that utilization as we hedge against the out-of-reporting numbers. It also, that's a platform that we'll continue to modernize. And as I said, I'll call it a 4.5-gen platform as we pair it up and partner with F-35. Not to say we don't want F-30. We absolutely need F-35 in the fleet as soon as we can get it. There have been some challenges. We're a little bit behind timeline, and that's part of our legacy Hornet challenges right now. But we'll get F-35 to the fleet, and then when you pair those two up together, I think they bring a very, very good complement from in terms of, if you call it a high-low mix. If my low part of that mix is Super Hornet, we're in a pretty good spot.
Okay, over here.
Hey, Justin Doubleday with Inside Defense. I just wanted to ask about the next generation fighter research and development project. Where does the Navy stand in developing the requirements for that project, and to what extent will you collaborate with the Air Force?
So their initial, this work has been ongoing back obviously in the Pentagon and in N98, our resource sponsor. In fact, that's a brief I'm getting tomorrow when I go back with Admiral Miller. So they're collaborating. I think, part of when you talk about whether that future platform will be manned or unmanned, the value of bringing unmanned to the air wing, to the ship, to the carrier environment quickly and learning from that is key, because I think that will help inform the future for that next generation air dominance. Then you ask, would we partner with the Air Force? I don't know the answer to that. I know there's been some growing pains. We did the joint program for F-35, and we started out with a lot of commonality. Now I think we've, as I look at it, sort of devolved into 3 different platforms. But that's making life for General Bogdan, a challenge. But there's benefits of doing that, and probably when we can partner with Air Force, we certainly will. Where we've got to look at unique capabilities for the carrier environment as a replacement for our eventual Super Hornets. We need to make sure that we're considering that as well. So we're involved in it. I've not been involved heavily. Like I said, I'll get an update tomorrow on where we stand to kind of help shape that. But we'll build on, obviously, F-35, all the things the attributes that it brings, plus I think what we learned from the manned-unmanned teaming with MQ-25.
Okay. Other points here. Right here.
Hi, I'm Jack Rapansky, unaffiliated. What about launch and recovery systems? How happy are you with what you have today, and how would you like to see that evolve over the next 5 to 10 years? And as a follow-up, do you want to see carriers get bigger or smaller, and especially with regard to that launch and recovery capability?
Yeah. What we have right now on our Nimitz class they're very reliable. And I think they're doing well. We've got new technologies you're well aware of that we're introducing on Ford with the electromagnetic aircraft launching system catapults. And I think that testing has gone very good. We've operated those on ship power, done the dead load shots into the James River. That's going, I think, very well. And the advanced arresting gear piece, that's a little more concerning. There's some challenges working through there because unlike our legacy systems, we're operating with 2 different essentially feeders for the arresting gear wire. They're water twisters or drums where that arresting gear cable is housed. And the challenge is the software as airplanes land, ensure that we can have a recentering software for airplanes that land either with a drift or land off center. When the old block and tackle assembly, it sort of did that for you a little bit. With the new separate containers, if you will, that has to be built into the software to do that. And they're working through that right now, but I think it'll eventually mature. It gives us the ability to launch probably a wider, much lighter launch and recover, much lighter airplanes and heavier airplanes. So it allows us a little more space, or a little more trade space, as you will, as we bring on new platforms, manned and unmanned. So I think we're, what I see on Ford in terms of advanced arresting gear and EMALs, that we're working through some challenges there, but I think that we'll be in a good spot. And we obviously have a proven system on our Nimitz class if we need to fall back.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question here. This lady right here in the 3rd row.
Hi, Hope Hodgesack with military.com. I know there was an Osprey that recently made a flight with 3D printed or additive manufacturing parts. I was curious to hear your thoughts about kind of the full potential of that technology and how in the next 5 or 10 years it could change the game for naval aviation.
It very much could and will. Admiral Grossglag's updated both the service chiefs recently on that specific part, and they both chimed in on we've got to get there sooner, faster, and get to the point where we're bringing the cost down for that part. And Admiral Grossglag's, where they did this, he said we're not to the point where it's making sense, right now from what it costs. It's still about, he said between 8 and 10 times more expensive to do it now. But as we start to do it more often, we'll quickly bring that cost difference down, and this will allow us both, deployed on ships to have one of those printers, or our big deck amphibs or carriers, and then the ability to have that at our depots around the world to print as we need, pulling us away from the reliance on a much longer, maybe a longer supply system. But tremendous capability and advantages of being able to do that kind of printing. I think we've got to get through like all new technologies, it's going to be expensive up front, but we'll quickly start to use it and see where we can take full advantage of what that brings in terms of supply support, which is huge.
Well, Admiral, thank you for your time today. I know your time is precious. It's a terrific opportunity for this audience inside the Beltway to get a chance to talk to you when you're here and to get your perspective, which is truly different. You're having to make it happen and do a lot of not just future and planning activities, community management, but also the essential execution activities, and hearing you talk about it all together was very informative. So on behalf of CSIS and the Naval Institute, we thank you for your time, and we also need to acknowledge one more time our sponsors, Lockheed Martin and Huntington Ingalls. Without